Thanks be to God indeed for that word and that story of Joseph. And we're going to look at that in great detail today as we continue in our sermon series, Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets by Andy Stanley. Now, last week we looked at the first question. He suggests that before we make a decision, we ask ourselves a series of questions. And there's 5 questions, and so that's what we're going through in the series. The first question he said we should ask ourselves is, are we being honest with ourselves really? And he talked about how we can tend to fool ourselves a lot of the time and even lie to ourselves. And today we look at the second question, which is the legacy question. Now this story, or this question, certainly was in front of me this entire week. I got a call about Tuesday, I guess it was, and I was asked to help out another pastor doing a funeral. So I said, yeah, and there's a certain way that I like to do funerals, and I call them celebrations of life. So usually I talk about 3 different things. I talk about faith and the importance of faith, and then I get down to how that person lived their life, the gift of life we have, and then how they ministered to other people. So it's kind of like, well, what story is this person going to tell? What's their legacy that I can share with others as we celebrate this life well lived, right? And normally, if I don't know somebody, I have to heavily rely on the family members to tell me stories about the person that has passed away. And so, anyway, I'll sit and I'll listen to stories. Now, we don't really think of our lives necessarily as stories, do we? But what if somebody was going to tell your story? What if somebody was speaking at your funeral or your passing? What would they say? What story do you want to tell in your life? What story do you want told about your life? What's your legacy? Our lives are like stories, even though we don't always think of them in that context or in that way. But there's, in the broadest sense of it all, we can say it breaks down into certain chapters, doesn't it? In the broadest sense, you've got, well, I was born, and then, the elementary school, high school, or maybe married life and career and retirement or whatever. And so you've got these different segments. But you can even break them down like we're going to do today with Joseph's story by events. Well, this happened, and then this happened, and then that happened. And those chapters are really made and formed one decision at a time. Each decision we make is like a chapter in our lives that we're writing. Because again, as Andy reminds us, we are responsible for the decisions we make, even when somebody else makes a decision, which forces us to make a decision, right? So maybe it's important we look at that, because what happens a lot of times is, and we talked about this last week, when the heart gets sold on an idea or a person in our lives, then we get all in. And a lot of times we react to a situation out of our emotion. And when we act out of emotion, what happens to the brain? Cuts off, doesn't it? Because now we're reacting emotionally to a situation, and when we react emotionally, normally those decisions aren't good. And when we act emotionally, we're really thinking about the immediate, right? We're not thinking about the big picture, our big story, our legacy. We're thinking about the immediate rather than the ultimate. I was reminded of this concept as I reflected back on the chapters of my life. There were 2 different there were two occasions or two events in my life that were very similar. And in one occasion, I acted in a very healthy, logical, calm, unemotional way. And it led to good things. Things went well. My mind was engaged in the process of making the decision. Something bad had happened. Okay, so now what am I going to do? How am I going to react? And I decided, well, I'm going to react in a good way. And I got involved in swimming again and ran and triathlons and all kinds of things, right? Well, about 7 years later, a similar event happened. And I was faced with the same decision. Now, I totally reacted in a way different way, a way emotional way. That doesn't sound good. But I acted with emotion. And when I acted emotionally, what happened was I found that my world started to cave in on itself. All I could think about was this terrible thing and the emotion of it all and how brokenhearted I was. And I began to isolate and withdraw and get depressed and all kinds of things and do some very self-destructive behaviors. The one time, and this drove me nuts for years because I always wondered, how could I react to a similar situation in two contradictory ways? One way was healthy and the other way was hurtful and harmful to myself and others. What in the heck was the difference? And as I read this chapter, it's like, ding! You know, the light bulb finally went on. I paid somebody like $60 an hour to listen to me tell the story and why I reacted one way versus the other. All I needed to do was buy a $15 book and I would have found the answer. Because the thing was, one time I acted with logic and reason and I thought of the consequences, and the other one I acted emotionally. I was caught up in the immediate. How many of us do that? We're forced to make a decision on the spot. And we get caught up in the emotion of it all. We get caught up in the stress and of the pressure. You got to decide. What are you going to do? Are you going to lie? Are you going to cheat? Are you going to steal? Or are you going to do the right thing? Are you going to do something harmful, self-destructive? Or are you going to do something that's life-producing, that adds to your story? That's a good part of your story that you're not going to regret later on. How are you going to react? Well, I think as we look at this story, or this question about the legacy question, the story of Joseph is just chock full of these decision-making moments where Joseph is writing his ultimate story. And when you think about it, it's pretty incredible because in the book of Genesis, Joseph gets 13 different chapters. It's that important. Now, did Joseph think as he was making all these decisions along the way that somebody would tell it thousands of years later? Probably not. And yet, it's such a powerful story about making decisions and leaving a legacy and stopping and hitting the pause button in emotional situations that his story deserves 13 chapters in the Old Testament. Pretty powerful stuff. Now, we've already heard about the beginning part, right? Joseph is 17 years old. Years around 1850 BC. And he's born, and he's 17 years old, and he is his dad's favorite. He's the apple of his dad's eye. And he's the apple of his dad's eye because, one, he's the youngest. He's the baby of the family. If you're the baby of the family, you know what it's like. It's old, right? I'm the oldest of the family. I always, anyway. So, the baby of the family, he's the baby of the family, and not only is he the baby of the family, born to Jacob in his old age, but he's born to Jacob's favorite wife. I suggest you don't have a favorite wife, guys, but anyway. So, Joseph can do no wrong, and he's so favored that he makes this coat of many colors, and he has these dreams, and he tells these dreams to his brothers about how they're going to bow down to him, and they're like, man, this guy's just full of himself. There's no way I'm bowing down to this idiot, right? And they get really upset and jealous. Well, Dad sends him out one day, Joseph, out to check on his brothers who are out in the fields tending the flocks. And his brothers see him coming, and they've had it up to here with this guy, right? A favorite son. Ooh, here comes Joseph. I wonder what he's going to tell us today. Well, let's kill him before he can tell us anything. And so they make this elaborate scheme. And his brothers, though, they kind of chicken out, and they're like, man, I don't know. Killing him's kind of rough. Let's just throw him in this pit until we can make a real decision. So they throw him in the pit. Right? Now the brothers are caught in this dilemma. What are they going to do? If they kill him or they leave him in this pit, what are they going to do? What are they going to go home and tell Dad? So they're sitting around having dinner discussing this, and they sell Joseph into slavery. Some Ishmaelites come by. They sell him to the Ishmaelites for a profit. They've gotten rid of their problem, but they still have this dilemma. What story are we going to tell Dad? And they come up with this thing that we found his coat full of, they sprinkled blood on it, and that all of a sudden, Joseph's out of the picture. He's been eaten by wild animals. Brothers make a decision, though. Out of their jealousy, out of their emotion, they make an emotional decision which makes them, as Andy says, liars for life. Now they've got to go home, tell Dad a lie about their brother who they sold into slavery, but the rest of their life, they've got to keep up this story. So their chapter, one of the chapters in their story is, I lied. Threw my brother in a pit and sold him into slavery. Their chapter. But there's one brother who He's like, this isn't right. Reuben says this isn't right and to himself, and he makes this plan that when his brothers are asleep, he's going to go and rescue Joseph out of this pit, right? But it's too late. But Reuben is the only one that doesn't act out of emotion, that knows that there's consequences to our actions and our decisions. I bet there's a Reuben in your life. Bet there's somebody in your life that gives you good advice. Maybe you need to listen to the Reuben in your life. Well, the story continues, right? So he's sold into slavery to the Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites go to Egypt, and he's sold to Potiphar. Potiphar, part of the palace guard, a military leader. And, here Joseph has a decision to make. He's already faced the pit, and now he's got a decision to make because now he's sold into slavery. This rich, privileged, spoiled little brat is now a slave. What's he going to do? Well, he's got some options, right? He can run away and try to escape. He can be just lazy like all the other slaves and just do the minimum. He can be difficult and cause problems. Or maybe he can just do his best. And that's what he decides. Joseph decides and makes the decision, I'm just going to make the most out of this situation. I'm going to do the best that I can, even though I hate this. It's not what I wanted. The decision to be sold into slavery wasn't in my life plan. But I'm going to do my best, and he does so well that Potiphar puts him in charge of everything, right? He's the head of the household. He's second in command almost. Well, maybe third. Potiphar's wife, and then Joseph. Well, the author of Genesis tells us that Potiphar's wife noticed how handsome and well-built this Joseph character was. And she became a little bit enamored with Joseph. Uh-oh. Another decision, right? The scriptures tell us in Genesis that Potiphar started to try to get Joseph to have an affair with her. And Joseph kept saying, no, 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 I can't do that. I can't do that. It's not right. It's not right. I can't do this. But Potiphar's wife insisted over and over and over. Now, Joseph's in a no-win situation, right? It's not just a morality issue. It's not whether or not he should have an affair with Potiphar's wife. It's really a life and death issue for Joseph. Either way he chooses, it ends up in death. Either way. He's in a dilemma. He's at a crossroads. He's got an important decision to make. And he keeps saying no. And then in Genesis 39, 8 through 9, he says, but he refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? Sin against God. Faced with this decision, he's in a no-win situation. What does Joseph do? What's the advice that we can take away from what Joseph did when he made this decision? You know what he did? Played the tape all the way through. In other words, rather than just making an emotional decision, just making the immediate decision, he played the tape through. If I do this, then this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and this person's going to be affected, and this person's going to be affected, and this is going to happen, and I'm probably going to end up dead. How many of us don't hit the pause button and play that tape all the way through? You make the emotional decision, then the chapter's written. Ugh. Yikes. We only would have hit the pause button, played the tape through, and understood the ramifications of that decision, how it was going to become a part of our entire life story, would we have made a different decision. Play the tape through. All right, so play the tape through. Now, what happens next? Well, Potiphar's wife gets really mad because she keeps getting turned down and denied by Joseph. So one day she's with Joseph, and she grabs a part of his robe and accuses him of raping her. Well, now Potiphar's in a difficult situation because what do I do? The very fact that he didn't have Joseph put to death immediately for what he had been accused of with his wife says that Potiphar really didn't believe his wife. He really took Joseph's side, but there had to be a punishment. All eyes were on the Potiphar. So what did he do? Had him thrown in prison. Oh my gosh, Joseph is gone from bad to worse, right? I mean, first he gets sold into slaves, then he gets some good things happen, but then he gets in this dilemma with the wife, and now he's back in prison. Hey, God, where are you? Have you ever asked that when you're making a decision? I mean, if God was really supposed to be with Joseph, wouldn't he have erased all this stuff in the first place? Wouldn't he taken care of it so that Joseph wasn't thrown in the pit, wasn't sold into slavery, and now finds himself into prison? How many of us have been in that situation? Here's the lesson there. Because we know the end of the story, right? Joseph finds himself in prison, but we know the end of the story, which tells us that even in your life, when bad things happen and it's a chapter in your life, God's not done writing your story. It's just a chapter. Give up the pen to God and let him finish your story. That's what happened. And Joseph has another decision to make. What do I do when I'm here in prison? And he goes to his old decision or his former decision. I'm going to do my best here in prison. And before you know it, he's put in charge of the entire prison. Because people take notice. He's the trustee of all trustees in the prison. He's taking care of everything. And he meets a couple of buddies there, a cupbearer and a baker who worked for the Pharaoh. And one night, these two have a dream, and they're really upset about the dream. And they come to Joseph and they go, man, I had this nightmare last night, or this dream, and I'm wondering what it's about. Can you interpret dreams, Joseph? I mean, I know you're a talented guy. There's nothing it seems like you can't do. Can you interpret dreams? Joseph says, well, tell you what, guys, I can't interpret dreams, but I know somebody who can. My God. Tell me your dream. So these two characters tell him the dream, and the cupbearer, in 3 days, ends up restored and back to working with the Pharaoh. And the baker, he didn't fare too well. He ended up beheaded and impaled 3 days later on Pharaoh's birthday. Now, Joseph is hoping that the cupbearer remembers him when he goes back to Pharaoh, and that Pharaoh will release him from prison, but it doesn't happen. For 7 years, he's been in prison. Now, after these dreams, he waits another 2 years. 9 years, 9 years he's been in prison. It's a long chapter in your life. God's not done writing the story. One day, Pharaoh has a dream. And he has a dream. He has a couple of dreams, but he has a dream. And he's wondering, he gathers all his magicians around him and astrologers and astronomers and all the wise men, and they're like, the Pharaoh says, can you interpret this dream? Can you give me what's this dream mean? Nobody can tell him. And the cupbearer overhears the conversation, and all of a sudden the cupbearer remembers Joseph interpreting his dream. He says, Pharaoh, I know a guy. How many of you know a guy? I know a guy. He can interpret dreams. So Pharaoh calls for Joseph, right? Joseph comes up, and Pharaoh says, can you interpret these dreams for me? And Joseph says, no, I really can't do that. It's not one of my gifts. But I tell you what, God. So Pharaoh tells him his dreams, and Joseph interprets. He says, this is what it means. Egypt is going to have 7 years of record harvest, grain harvest. Now, the whole economy of Egypt runs on grain. And for 7 years, Egypt is going to prosper. It's going to be wealthy. It's going to be awesome. There's going to be grain coming out of our ears. There's going to be so much grain. Then for the next 7 years, well, it's going to be slim pickings. There won't be a kernel of grain to be found. Nothing's going to grow for 7 years. Then Joseph is bold enough to give advice to the most powerful man in the world, Pharaoh. Says, Pharaoh, if you don't mind, this is what I would do. I would appoint somebody over your grain supplies and to help you manage those so that when the 7 bad years comes, there'll be plenty of grain from the 7 good years. Well, Pharaoh thinks that's a great idea, and who does he appoint? Joseph. So once again, Joseph finds himself in a position of power. He finds himself the second most powerful man in Egypt, the prime minister. And he does just what his plan outlined. For 7 years, he stores grain like it's going out of style. He's buying grain that they don't even need, right? He's just buying it up because he knows 7 years is coming and there's not going to be nothing. The plan works perfectly, and when those 7 years come, everybody's coming to Egypt to buy grain. The nation has been saved because God interpreted this dream through Joseph. Now it's all good. Okay, so word gets out. Hey, there's no grain in the land, but there's grain in Egypt. So back to the family of Joseph. Jacob sends those brothers to Egypt to buy some grain. They get to Egypt, and they just so happen to show up at the exact same grain storage facility that Joseph is touring that day. How about that? And they don't recognize Joseph. They don't know who he is. I mean, he's decked out. He looks Egyptian, right? Joseph looks at them and knows immediately who they are. Now, he's got a decision to make, right? How do I react in this situation? I've been in prison. I've been falsely accused. All these bad things have happened. Now, some good things have happened, but some bad things have happened. Do I get my revenge right now? I mean, I can make life miserable for my brothers. I can have them killed. I'm the second most powerful man in the world. There's nothing I can't do. How many of us have ever come on to that point where it just so happened that we met somebody who we resented, we were angry at, and an opportunity arose for us to get that revenge? Here it is. Revenge is a dish best served cold. I've waited and waited, and now is my opportunity. Now I can get back at my brothers or that person for throwing me in the pit that led me to prison, that's given me this life separated from my dad and family. How many of us are going to go for the jugular and get that revenge? Revenge could be a chapter in your story, but it wasn't for Joseph. Why? Because he chose something different. He chose reconciliation. Left out a whole lot of details in that. But for 13 chapters, the story of Joseph unfolds. He never expected anybody to remember him. He never expected that story of his life to be told. But because it was good decision after good decision after good decision, which led to the salvation of Egypt eventually, and his family, reconciliation and restoration of his family, the story gets told over, over again. See, Joseph left a legacy. Whenever there was a turning point, whenever there was a crossroads, whenever there was an important decision to make, it's as if, he didn't do this literally, but it's as if he was asking himself, what story do I want people to tell about? I don't know where you're at in decision. Maybe it's a downtime and you're not in that season of major decision. Maybe it's a time, though, that there's a major decision on your mind. What are you going to do? How do you want your story to go? Are you going to act out of emotion? Are you going to trust God? Are you going to let God write the next chapter in your life? Or are you going to seek revenge or something that's self-destructive? It's all up to you. You're writing the story with God. This week, I leave you with this challenge. Last week we said, look in the mirror, ask yourself the question, am I being honest with myself really? This week, I want you to say to yourself, I will decide a story I'm proud of.